Hey, it's Mark Robideau from Pilot Workshops. Welcome to this IFR challenge. If you fly in winter, you're definitely going to want to watch this. Our scenario starts when our pilot notices his altimeter is off by over 300 feet at the final approach fix. He's flying the approach in cold weather, but here's the catch. There's no snowflake icon on the approach chart, so there's no requirement for a cold temperature correction. We'll explain the scenario in detail and see if you can guess what the problem is. Then you'll hear from our instructor, Ryan Cook, who will tell you what you should do if you ever encounter this problem. At the end, you'll have a chance to win this complete flight simulator package that's perfect for practicing IFR at home. So let's get started with the scenario. You and your business partner run an IT company specializing in emergency recoveries. You get desperate calls at all hours from clients when things have come to a grinding halt and every minute of downtime costs the owners money. Most of the time, you can fix the problem remotely, but sometimes it requires a site visit. That's where your company, Piper Seneca, comes in. You've been flying for the past decade and have just over 1,000 hours, but only 45 in the Seneca. That's just enough to be comfortable in serious weather, like today. You're based in Ogden, Utah. The server farm you must visit is in Boise, Idaho, and it'll be a rough flight, with a front bringing in snow and gusty winds. The forecast for Boise at the time of your arrival is northwest winds at 14 knots, with visibility 2 miles in light snow and mist, and ceilings of overcast 600. Other nearby airports are the same or worse. In fact, the nearest solid alternate is almost an hour further northwest in Pendleton, Oregon. That storm is heading east, however, so a missed approach that takes you west means waiting it out in better weather, or better driving from somewhere nearby if you must. It's just you and your chief technician, plus the gear on board. So you call the FBO front desk and ask them to top off to the full 123 gallons of fuel. You review the approach charts for Boise, of which there are many. The likely ones are the ILS or RNAV approaches to runways 28 left and right. The approaches to 28 right have lower minimums, but no approach lights, which could be an issue if snow is falling. The approach to 28 left has higher minimums for both ceiling and visibility, but the runway has good approach lights and runway centerline lights. None of the approaches show the snowflake icon, so no cold weather adjustments to altitude are needed. That's one less thing to worry about. You've learned to always check for this with all the winter flying you do. The temperature on the surface at Boise right now is minus 22 Celsius, or about 8 below Fahrenheit. You might not even need the de-ice boots on this trip as it might be too cold. Hopefully, the aircraft heater won't give out again. The first part of the flight goes exactly as planned, and a little more than an hour later you pick up the Boise ATIS. It's a special observation from about 7 minutes ago with winds 300 at 14, visibility 1 in snow and blowing snow. The runway visual range for runway 28 left is 6,000 feet. Ceilings are overcast 300 and the temperature is minus 21. The altimeter is 3034, which you set in your PFD and your backup altimeter. You tell Big Sky Approach you want the RNAV Yankee runway 28 right approach, and they clear you direct seller and for the approach. You hold 6,800, waiting for the glide path to center as you prefer to get stabilized on the glide path as soon as practical. The glide path needle is still descending towards center as you cross a meme and approach sends you over to tower. This seems odd, but it centers a moment later and you start down. Now it appears you'll reach ZICSIP well before you reach the check altitude of 6,000 feet. Sure enough, your PFD and backup altimeters both read 6,390 feet. A quick glance to the GPS altitude shows only 6,024 feet. That's much more reasonable, so it seems the altimeter must be wrong. This LPV approach can't have a false glide slope. In fact, most don't even have a check altitude. You already verified there's no cold weather correction. You're descending on glide path and need to get within about 300 feet of the ground to complete this approach. People are waiting for your services, and any lost time is critical. What will you do? 1. Stay on glide path and fly to decision altitude per the altimeter. 2. Stay on glide path and fly to decision altitude per the GPS altitude. 3. Stay on glide path but add 300 feet to the decision altitude for a faulty altimeter. 4. Quickly adjust your altimeter to read 300 feet lower. Stay on glide path and fly to decision altitude per the altimeter. Or 5. Divert to the first airport west of Boise where sailings are at least 500 feet above decision altitude. Land and drive back to Boise. Analyze the resources and then make your choice. Okay, so what would you do in this situation? We assigned this scenario to Ryan Cook, who you may have seen in some of our other IFR training courses. He'll tell you what he would do and more about what's causing this problem in the first place. Here's Ryan's response video.
The altimeter is in error by more than 300 feet, but I'm not concerned. I'll confidently go with option 1, stay on glide path and continue to DA per the altimeter as if everything is normal, because it is. To see why, we need to dig into how temperature affects altimeters. It's confusing because low temperatures equal high indicated altitude, which equals low true altitude, except close to the ground where it's negligible, except sometimes when it's not. All joking aside, it's not intuitive. I still need to pause and think it through sometimes, and I live in Wisconsin. Let's break that down. Altimeters measure air pressure, which decreases in a predictable way as you climb. Picture a column of air sitting on the ground 1,000 feet high. That column is holding up all the air in the atmosphere above it. The weight of all that atmosphere pressing down on the column creates a pressure I can measure. I can also measure the pressure at the bottom of this column of air, which has all that weight plus the weight of the 1,000-foot column itself. That makes the pressure at the bottom higher by 1 inch of mercury. So as I climb from the bottom to the top, my altimeter will read 1 inch less of mercury. If I calibrate that altimeter in feet, it will read 1,000 feet of climb. The same column of air that occupied 1,000 feet on a standard day takes up less space when it's cooled down and gets denser. Perhaps the column is now only 900 feet high. Climbing to the top of the column, the altimeter still senses 1 inch of pressure change because the weight of the air above it is the same. So it indicates 1,000 feet of climb. But my true altitude, and my proximity to any terrain or obstacles, is only 900 feet. If I climbed 2 columns worth of air on this cold day, the altimeter would read 2,000 feet, but my true altitude would be about 1,800 feet. That's the key concept here. The error is 0 at ground level, where the reporting station is, but increases cumulatively with altitude. An altimeter that indicates higher than the true altitude is potentially a problem. On the ground at Boise, the error is 0. Using a formula, the predicted error at the published glide path intercept altitude of 6,000 feet MSL, or about 3,100 feet AGL, will be 363 feet. That's why you see a difference between the altimeter indication and the published check altitude. The error is especially noticeable on this approach because the long final approach segment results in an unusually high crossing altitude at the final approach fix, and it's a really cold day. However, the error by 1,000 feet AGL will dwindle to 115 feet high. At the decision height of 250 feet AGL, the altimeter reads 29 feet high. You'll still descend a bit closer to the ground than on a warmer day, but all the potential errors in altitude on this approach are acceptable. How did I determine these errors are acceptable? I didn't. The procedure designers did. Every approach is subject to a study of whether charted altitudes give sufficient clearance at historical temperature extremes for that location. If everything checks out, no adjustments need to be made. If not, a cold temperature restricted airport is born. Cold temperature restrictions are denoted by a snowflake icon on the approach plate, along with the temperature at or below which altitude adjustments must be made. An FAA NOTAM lists all of these airports, indicates which approach segments need adjusting, and provides a correction table and rules for making the adjustments. There is one exception. Airports where the longest runway is less than 2,500 feet are not evaluated. It's up to the pilot in that case. Fortunately, there are few IFR airports where this could be a factor. You could also have warm weather errors with the opposite effect, which has some implications further out on the approach, but that's another discussion. Other factors could cause indicated altitude to differ from the charted crossing altitude. An altimeter setting from an hour-old ATIS might be one. So would an altimeter or static system issue, or an error in precisely determining your position relative to a fix, such as when using a distant VOR crossing radial. Mistakenly entering an altimeter setting is probably the most likely error. A setting of 3033 instead of 3003 would result in a true altitude 300 feet lower than indicated. So it's important to cross-check altitude if you can, despite the day-to-day variation. The check altitude is the last chance to catch that simple, dangerous mistake. Just understand why it may not match up, ensure it's not your mistake, and proceed accordingly. But don't create your own system, such as with option 2 of flying to minimums using GPS altitude. GPS altitude is derived differently from barometric altitude, is subject to its own errors, and is not intended to be used as primary for IFR flight. Don't create your own buffers, such as option 3 of adding 300 feet to decision altitude. It's unnecessarily conservative, and with weather close to minimums will likely result in a missed approach. Option 4, adjusting the altimeter to match the check altitude, ends up creating the effect of option 3. As you descended and the error became insignificant, your altimeter would read 300 feet lower than you actually were. It would show you at DA when you still had 300 feet to go. That's not a problem with respect to terrain, but it will make a difference for ATC separation after the likely missed approach. I wouldn't fault a pilot who believes his altimeter is faulty and so diverts to better weather, as in option 5, but it isn't necessary. Despite the apparent problem, the buffer designed into the approach is sufficient, and it will all correct itself enough by the time you arrive at DA.
I hope you enjoyed this scenario. We do this every month in IFR Mastery. We create a new scenario and have an expert respond to it. And here's some good news. You can sign up right now and try it for free. You'll get instant access to the scenario we just went through, as well as over 100 more in the library. At the end of this video, go ahead and hit the green button to enter the flight sim drawing and get more details on the IFR Mastery free trial. Thanks for joining me today, and safe flying.